And welcome back to Happy Hour FN. That was Afrojack, The Spark, featuring Spree Wilson. And of course, as mentioned previously, we have a very special guest with us today. We are honored to have Professor Geert Hofstede himself in the studio. Most of you listeners should already know a thing or two about Professor Hofstede. But if you don't already, all you really need to know is that we are sitting here with somebody who has redefined the way we communicate, manage, and do business with people from all over the world and really understand one another despite our cultural differences. He has also developed the basic tools needed to understand cultures, which is found in his National Cultural Dimensions.
First to enter is the master, as they say in Chinese culture, and Geert got there first. He gave us markers on the playing field so that we could get on with the game, you might say. Before that, they were just a bunch of kids playing pickup soccer on this wide open field.
He is very much a family man. When you talk with Geert about his family, Mike, his sons, his grandchildren, his eyes lighten up and he's a different man. He is totally naturally in place, he is himself.
People are not necessarily relaxed in meeting him. They don't know whether they owe him criticism, open criticism, or admiration.
He doesn't give up. He bites himself into, well, ask his colleagues and his bosses and his subordinates. They would tell you too, I think.
Ik denk dat het te maken heeft met zijn sterrenbeeld.
Vertel eens.
De weegschaal. Die lui die draven door als idioten. Net raspaarden. En dan liepen ze wel eens dood natuurlijk tegen de muur.
How would I characterize him?
Curious, he's eager to know. He still wants to go into depth for everything.
Rather stubborn and self-contained person. I couldn't work with him.
En dan was hij eindeloos bezig om over dat tuitje heen te komen. Ja, ik nam dat allemaal niet zo serieus, maakt me niet uit. Maar Geert wou echt die prestatie leveren.
I was going to say a pragmatist in that he is not dogmatic.
He is of course an innovator. He has done things in different ways and has made a great international impact.
He hates ignorance and he shows it.
Geert was de degelijke helft van dit tweetal, zou ik maar zeggen. En Geert was dus wel ambitieus.
He is a bit of a rebel. He likes to do things differently. He does not take certain normal ways of working as a given.
Cross-cultural psychology begins as a serious discipline from the publication of his book, which, as you know, is one of the most widely cited pieces of social science that we have today.
I'm not so easily hurt. One thing I'm convinced that if you have a message, you will find people who agree and people who disagree. If nobody disagrees, you have no message. You're only confirming the things everybody has always believed already. So if you have something new, you will have critics. And they have an essential role to play.
At the end of his 1980 book, Geert invited scholars from different parts of the world to challenge the possible limitations of his approach. I always thought that was an act of intellectual courage and much respected him for it.
I think Geert enjoys, but by nature also is attracted to different ways of approaching things, not taking assumptions for granted, but challenging them. and therefore himself puts himself out of that establishment system. The establishment notices that as well, and then defines him as a rebel. Yeah? So it is partly Geert with his strong opinions and different approaches, and it's partly the social system that looks at him and says, "Why are you so different? We have problems with that." Yeah.
I know it has hurt him terribly, but he's beyond that by now. He's totally beyond that. No, he just doesn't care anymore, and that's good because the rest of the world acknowledges him enormously. Yeah.
So, being a member of the editorial board, I asked, why is Geert Hofstede not on the list of the top 40 Dutch economists? And then they said, well, because he didn't study economics. And then I said, well, I know another person who hasn't studied economics and is on that list, and it's the Dutch Nobel Prize winner in economics, Jan Tinbergen, because Jan Tinbergen studied physics, and he's on the list. So there was no escape anymore, and the next year Geert was on the list, and of course, number one.
I'm not necessarily the best person in getting new ideas accepted. And I have also met a lot of resistance in this respect. I met sufficient acceptance that I did not bother about the resistance too much. And actually I was more surprised with the acceptance than I was with the resistance.
I just read a lot of his theory about dimensions, everything, and I didn't have any idea that I would meet him in the future. So for me, it's just like, now it's for me like, oh my God, when I saw it in schedule, I couldn't believe that.
Well, you've read a lot about me, but I don't know anything about you.
What was the most difficult part of your research?
Discovering that it would be interesting to other people. I'm interested in people. And, people come in different kinds and different backgrounds. And I'm also, as you have noticed, I'm very interested what the life experience of people means for them afterwards. To what extent we're all marked by our life experiences, especially in our young days, but afterwards as well.
We were very idealistic. We married after the war. And after the war, it was so bad. Then we should do everything new and everything would be better than before this horrible time.
Everybody has a task in life, and you have to try to find it. And who gives you the task? It's God. The task is, I think, which circumstances enabled me to fulfill, is to make people aware of the effect of people's background in their communication, and therefore to contribute a little bit to understanding between people, between groups of people especially. Yeah.
A little bit of misfit dancing, a little bit of JoJo dancer, a little bit of thoughts of mine coming out the mind of this midnight rambler.
And do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about how you came up with your dimensions?
I worked for an international company as a psychologist, And I traveled widely around in different subsidiaries, and I noticed that people behaved differently in similar situations there. And that interested me very much. And actually that was the beginning of starting to study cultural differences between different societies. And after quite a number of years, I published a book on this. Whole human societies were coping with the same kind of basic problems, but every society had found its own answers to that over time. That related to the concept of culture. Culture is a way of acting, feeling and thinking shared by most members of a particular society. And that is culture in the anthropological sense. The moment that conscience had evolved, then the question became, well, if they have a limited number of basic problems, what are these basic problems and how do they cope with those problems? First of all, how does a society handle inequality? Well, there is a history to this. The research was done in the late 60s. It started in the late 60s. And some people may remember that 1968 was a revolutionary year, especially among students in Europe and I think in the United States. And there was a lot of struggle about who had the power and how you could share the power. And therefore, in the questionnaire that was made at that time, the people who made the questions, they were also children of that age. There are lots of questions about power. And we had already noticed, when we were getting the answers, that there was a certain order in which countries answered those power questions. And this is where this idea of a dimension started, and this we called power distance. Then the second dimension is to what extent are individuals dependent on the people around them. If there is relatively little dependence on other people, at least that is what people strive for, we call that individualist societies. And if there is a lot of relationship, a lot of dependence between people who live close together, we call that collectivist societies. Third one is what is the emotional meaning of having been born as a woman or as a man, as a girl or as a boy. And that I have called masculinity, if there is a lot of difference, and femininity, if there is relatively little difference. And the next problem is how a society deals with the unknown. Some societies have developed a greater stability, a greater resistance to dealing with the unknown. They're relatively easygoing in face of the unknown, and other societies are very tight. They want to know and to control as much as possible what will happen. And I've called that uncertainty avoidance. Those were the four original dimensions, and they lasted for let's say certainly about 10 years. Then in the 1980s, I was in contact with people in East Asia, and I met a colleague who was a Canadian working in Hong Kong, Michael Harris Bond.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Of leave and decided I would go to the cross-cultural conference in Bhubaneswar, India. And I had been working on a study of values. So I was presenting 5 of the different cultural groups' results in Bhubaneswar. And at the end of my presentation, there was time for questions. And a bald-headed man in the back of the room stood up and praised the presentation, saying that he'd done a lot of work in values himself, but that he regretted to tell me that I'd analyzed my data incorrectly. That was the beginning of a beautiful colleagueship.
So we talked about the fact, to what extent are those 4 dimensions not only the effect of the cultures being different, but also of the fact that in all cases the questionnaires were made by people from Western countries. In the IBM questionnaire there were a lot of European input, and maybe that influenced what we got out. So what would happen, and that was Bond's idea, what would happen if we asked Chinese people to make a questionnaire?
I remember sitting with Geert looking at different statistical solutions to the factor analyses that we were doing, and watching him take a colored pencil, different colored pencils, and tracking the movement of different values across different factors, depending on how many factors you asked the computer to produce for you. So he was very, very close and attentive to his data.
Then when he analyzed those data in the same way as he had done before, then we found 3 of the dimensions again. We found power distance, we found individualism, we found masculinity. We did not find uncertainty avoidance, but we found a 5th dimension. And the remarkable thing is that that dimension was correlated with economic growth. And this was the time that the East Asian economic miracle had started.
He had, of course, been able to predict wealth of countries using either individualism or power distance, but he'd been unable to find a dimension of variation in values that would predict economic growth across a period of time. We were able to do that with one of the dimensions, and this intrigued him because we called that particular dimension the Confucian dynamism, work dynamism dimension.
It turned out that this dimension that Bond had detected worldwide, with distinguished countries, distinguished the fast-growing economies from the slow-growing economies. And that was so important that I said that had to become a new dimension, the 5th dimension. So we added another dimension, and the dimension I called long-term was a short-term orientation, because this was in the nature of the question. It suggested that the fast-growing economies were more thinking on the long term, and the slow-growing economies were thinking on the short term.
Nationally representative samples, because they're rich. This is
Then in the late 90s, I came into touch with somebody from the East European side, Michael Minkov, another Michael, and but we call him by his Bulgarian abbreviation Misho. He had been diving in the modern database, and he discovered this dimension, indulgence versus restraint. The 6th dimension, the last one, is indulgence versus restraint, and it is actually how you deal with, how a society deals with natural drives. Does it encourage people to express their feelings and their enjoyment and their happiness, or does it tell them, no, keep those things to yourself, and basically life is a valley of tears?
I'm sure that over time there will be new dimensions added. Do you believe that?
Well, I don't expect that so easily. The thing is that dimensions, as I explain also to my students, they don't exist. They are imaginative, they are structures of the mind, and if you make it too complex, people can't make sense out of it anymore.
Right. It's a construct, as Hofstede himself says. The model is not reality. Mr. or Mrs. Average German or average Egyptian does not exist. And I'm very careful to stress that in all training. This case. But, you're coming to train us in stereotypes. And I know this is an accusation that is thrown at Hofstede very regularly. Of course, human beings are infinitely complex. It's a model that we lay on top of our human behavior that affords us some insights. It doesn't explain us all. As he repeatedly says,
They're easy to remember. They're not always easy to understand, I must say. They're also sometimes misunderstood. But, and they are very nice stuff for trainers.
If you can hold up that mirror to people so that they become aware of how English they are or how Indian they are and how that affects their interaction, then you've come a long way. And you're not stereotyping. You're helping them identify that component of their own and other people's behavior that is culturally programmed. That's it. That's it.
It gave a structure to my findings, and here is certainly the fact that I was trained as an engineer. I liked structures, but I had found a structure and I had a message. Culture is multidimensional. There's also a tendency among simplistic people to divide culture into two, good ones and bad ones. And, there was no good or bad here. Each of those dimensions has its positive and its negative elements.
And it helps people to be non-judgmental and to take themselves outside of their own culture and see, okay, my way of doing things is not the only way.
I played with Meccano. I had talents there, probably inherited from my mother. And but this also justified the fact that I went for a technical education. However, in spite of my technical education, I also had these other elements of interest in relationships between people, in societies. People have said that my idea of paradigm, of dimensions of culture, is actually an engineering way of looking at culture. The Meccano may indirectly be present in the dimensions of culture. You take the word dimensions. Well, dimensions are also about constructions. It's the way of thinking dimensionally which fits well in the engineering mind. That is, of course, understanding how things fit together and composing something out of elements. I mean, it's a very basic learning process, and it's also an expression of someone's personality.
Well, it makes culture tangible. That's the most important thing. It proves that consumers are not becoming the same everywhere. This is what a lot of marketing people, in particular Western marketing people from America, from the UK, and also Dutch are very good in this, assuming that the rest of the world will become like them. If you look at the enormous amount of data that I have processed, what I dare to say is that about 70% of the differences in consumer behavior can be explained with the Hofstede model.
He brought international management to the Netherlands, which was an innovation, institutional innovation here, yes. He also was active in setting up EGOS, European Group for Organization Studies, as an international professional association. he was quite important in that respect, in bringing people together. I like to study institutions and how they change and how they're different. You see very often that things go wrong. And I often said to myself, if these people had not only studied Hofstede but also taken it to heart and applied it, lots of mistakes and misunderstanding would have been prevented.
It's very easy for people in international business to dismiss culture as being irrelevant to what they do. We're all people, we all understand each other, we all work internationally. They only really realize it once they've run headlong into culture as an obstacle to doing business. And that's when they call me in. Yeah, and then I assist them using Hofstede's work as a management tool, if you like, to facilitate this process. And it's incredibly powerful and valuable and pragmatic. That for me is the value of the Hofstede model.
I got some of my critical remarks from people who have no international experience and who sometimes even consider that what I say is an insult to their way of thinking and how do I dare say that, and this is nonsense. Culture is asking for trouble. You have to be prepared for resistance. You have to be prepared for people being shocked. It's almost, I think, as writing about sex in the Victorian age.
There is something which, he should say himself, but often entrepreneurs or rebels are driven by things in their youth where they felt not completely understood, perhaps, felt that they didn't completely fit in. And in that sense, I think Geert is an entrepreneur in the scientific field. And he should explain whether that comes from having felt a bit like an outsider in his youth or so.
In the family history, one recognizes elements that also appear in my personal history, in my family history, you could say. There is a continuity in this. There's a continuity in mankind, and I stand in that continuity. For example, my grandfather, Barend Peter Hofstede, who was a school master in Hengelo, in the east of the country. He was quite well known as an educationalist, regionally known. He was a local authority, and he assisted two of the entrepreneurs there in setting up the let's say education for their personnel, and that's something, of course, that appeals to me a lot. I have never known him. He died just 9 months before I was born. So if you want to believe in spirits that transfer, then that could be the case. Yeah. Well, they were my parents. My father was 12 years older than my mother, which had a interesting effect, is that I called my father with the formal way of address and my mother with the informal way of address.
His parents had a cool marriage. The marriage was not so good. They stayed together.
I wouldn't do it that way.
And what would you do then?
Well, have a different type of relationship. Have a relationship of constant intimacy. which I think I have been blessed with, because after 58 years of marriage, there is still intimacy between us. Let's say the first 15 years of my life, not only my own family, but also the Ledeboer family has played an important role. I had a 4-year older brother and a 6-year older sister. I was the youngest and more or less on my own as such. But as of, I think, 1933 or 1934, there was a family that moved in 2 doors away from us with 2 boys.
Geert was er dus, leefde gewoon in ons gezin mee. Hij was een onderdeel van het gezin. Het is het broertje van me. Hè? En het is ook niet zo dat de ene dominanter is dan de andere.
They had a lot of funny ideas. And one of the ideas is that they made a kind of gymnastic exercise at their terrace.
Als vanouds. Hoi. Wat leuk.
Ja, weet je, wat ik meteen dacht, die piano staat er niet meer.
Ja. Die staat in de achterkamer tegenwoordig.
Oh, ja.
Nee, dat wordt steeds gezelliger.
Het huis is ongewijzigd.
Ja.
De meubels zijn uiteraard anders.
Ja.
Maar, kijk maar naar het gras.
Wij zijn niet gewijzigd.
Wij zijn niet gewijzigd. Nee, wij zijn... dat is merkwaardig, hè?
Ja. Ik heb uitgerekend dat het 79 jaar geleden is dat ik hier voor het eerst kwam. 1934.
Wij hebben het van zijn ouders gekocht.
Oh. Ja, en wat grappig is, alles nog van Hoempatik.
Is er nog, ja.
Nou ja,
They call this word Hoempatik, which is a non-existing word. It's their word. They invented words like that. And this became about a summit of fun. If we really had a very festive day, we had a Hoempatik. And therefore, I consider my early years one big Hoempatik.
Nou, dan klommen we op dat muurtje. We waren nog klein, we waren zo hoog als het muurtje trouwens. Hè? En dan hadden we zo'n touw hier. En dan zwiepten we zo die kant op. En dan hadden we hier die ronde tuinstoelen. Ja. Die mijn dochter nog steeds heeft, de Fleur nog steeds heeft. Ja, die legden we op een rug. En dan die schommelde dan zo. En dan wipten we van het ene ding naar het volgende. Ja, het is allemaal in mijn herinneringen veel groter. En spannender, maar goed, oké.
De zandbak, die mis ik even.
Ja, de zandbak zat in
die stond daar namelijk. Ja. Die stond daar. En hier zetten jullie de tent op.
Ja. Ja. Die hadden een tent.
Daar hebben we nog een opname van jouw vader, die heeft dat gefilmd.
Ja.
Dat we allemaal achter elkaar uit die tent komen, inclusief hij zelf.
Ja.
Dan had iemand anders de camera gepakt. Ja.
En hier is natuurlijk het poortje, hè, waar we...
Ja. Oh ja. En daar speelden we in. En daar hadden we ook in de crisistijd, stond er zo'n huis leeg. En toen konden we via dat poortje daar in de tuin komen. En daar hadden we een roverschool. We hadden namelijk een roversbende. Ja, die heette Ratchaballa Castellon. Ja, en dus het moment in 1934 dat ik hier langs liep, vermoedelijk van ons huis komende naar school. Dat was, mijn school lag daarachter. En dat ik 3 jongens in de tuin zag. 3? Ja, Harry was er ook bij.
Harry, mijn neef.
Ja, neef, ja. Die was de grootste. Dus een grote, een middelgrote en een kleine. Ja. Die renden door de tuin heen. En ja, daar heb ik dus heel snel kennis mee gemaakt. En toen zat ik soms de helft van de tijd bij jullie. Ja. Maar het was hier veel leuker dan bij mij thuis. There was warmth in the Ledeboer family and there was less warmth in my family. Yes. It was a matter of having fun and warmth and doing things together. And that complemented, I think, my education very much. I'm extremely thankful that I had that second family.
Ik heb hier In dit huis heb ik mijn hele jeugd doorgebracht. Het was natuurlijk heel rustig. Er stond hier 1 auto in de straat, in de Roelofstraat. Daarbij vonden mijn ouders alles goed en vonden alles leuk. En het was hier altijd ontzettend gezellig. En Geert was eigenlijk altijd bij ons.
I remember there was sometimes maybe it was a certain day in the month or so that we had a rough house and we were fighting with Aart's father. He was all the 3 of us were allowed to fight, and we were wrestling, and that would be absolutely unheard of in my home. My own family was quite intellectual. We were all good students at school, and school marks were very important.
Hier oefende je dan hoogspringen, kun je nog herinneren?
Oh nee, dat weet ik niet meer.
Je was heel ambitieus, je wou een insigne halen voor de patronerij. En dan had je hier een touwtje gespannen.
Oh ja.
En dan rende je daar uit de voordeur over, net zo lang tot je er overheen was. En tot je dat insigne op je mouw had staan. Ja, Geert is natuurlijk altijd, lag altijd mijden voor op mij. Hij is veel slimmer. Hij begon al dat hij de eerste klas oversloeg, want hij had bijles al meteen om hartstikke idee in de tweede klas te beginnen. En vervolgens sloeg hij nog een klas over, ik geloof de 4e of zoiets. Hij was dus met 2 klassen voor.
Oh yes, I was a kind of standard, and so if there was a test and I missed it, then the test was too difficult. And if I did not miss it, then the people who couldn't answer, they were at fault. That could have made me an impossible, I would say, monster.
Ik had al veel vriendinnen en van een leuke school. Maar Geert was altijd 2 jaar jonger dan in zijn klas. Hij was altijd het jongetje, wel slim, de slimste weer van zijn klas, ellende. Maar ja, de meisjes zagen hem natuurlijk niet staan, want die waren allemaal 2 jaar ouder dan op zijn minst. Dus hier, al zijn vriendinnetjes, die waren hier. Die had ik wel. En dus met andere woorden, de vrouwen die werden door mij geleverd.
One of the things that hurt me as a child was that I couldn't swim. I got, like most children of my age, I got swimming lessons, and I was a bit afraid. But the point is that it would have taken a little bit more time to teach me that. And when the class went swimming, I was a little boy who had fear of water and who couldn't swim. I did not like it. It gave me also a kind of, an inferiority feeling. Yes, feeling stupid, yes. Until the moment, but that was by the time I was about 15, it made me so angry that I learned I went to the swimming pool and I took swimming lessons, and I think I had my first certificate in 3 weeks. And I got not only the A, but also the B and the C in a few weeks. The struggle is also in there. The struggle between the side of me that says, well, you can't. And the other side that says, well, you can. For example, I got my master's degree at the Technical University in Delft, and then 14 years later I got my PhD at the University of Groningen in social psychology, but I never felt completely accepted as a psychologist. I was extremely happy when one day I became a honorary fellow of the International Association for Cross-Cultural Psychology. I was happier with that than with other honorary titles I got.
We gingen wel samen naar de padvinderij. En het was natuurlijk zo dat Geert onmiddellijk... we werden allebei tegelijkertijd welp en Geert werd onmiddellijk gids of zoiets eigenlijk. Weet je, nu was gids ook heel betrouwbaar. En ik ben meer een vlierenfluiter. Dus Geert werd gids en ik werd helper.
To me, scouting meant a lot. It gave me a lot of new challenges. Unfortunately, scouting was forbidden by the occupants in 1941. One of the things we had to promise as a Cub Scout already was to always do our best. And I think I have that in me, always do my best. One of the very practical things is that I'm left-handed. But as a scout, I also had to learn to catch a ball with my right hand. Oh, sorry. What I didn't like is that my parents let me jump over a class in elementary school, so that from that moment onwards I was younger than the rest of my class. And that, to some extent, also determined my mentality. I was always the little boy who had to put in some extra to be accepted, but I was accepted. My first school grades in 1940, September, were the worst I ever had. And the very worst of all was German, 6-. It's how you react emotionally. What you considered good has now become evil, and what you considered evil has now become good. And you don't accept that. And therefore you protest, and yes, yeah. And that was more important than studying very hard on that subject. Afterwards, I did learn German. One of the reasons is that we had a German encyclopedia at home, and I got my sexual information from there, because I got absolutely no information about the facts of life from my parents. That was not done at that time, but I could find it all in the Meyers Konversationslexikon. However, I had, of course, to learn German. We could also sing German songs that were good. Just one, if you want me to sing, is Die Gedanken sind frei, wer kann sie erraten? Sie fliehen vorbei wie nächtliche Schatten. Kein Mensch kann sie wissen, kein Jäger erschießen, es bleibe dabei, die Gedanken sind frei. Well, that is a response to the Nazis. In German. There was a book which I had to read when I was a technical student at Delft University, which distinguished between the external and the internal productivity of labor. And the internal productivity of labor would be what the fact of working does to the development of the worker. And that appealed to me a lot. I had been trained, I think, as an engineering student to work towards the external productivity, but then I recognized there was also such a thing like the internal productivity. And I read somewhere that the day I read that more or less my destiny had been settled. It came at the end of my study, which was also the time that I was just completing this year of presidency of the Liberal Student Christian Association, traveling around.
Wij waren destijds allebei lid van een studentenvereniging. Geert studeerde in Delft en ik studeerde in Utrecht. En wij hadden een prezes, een voorzitter, dat was Geert dus. Hij kon zo erg veel, dat vindingrijke, dat moet je echt letterlijk nemen van een ingenieur. Hij kon werkelijk de sociale kant, de politieke kant als het moest. In het leggen van contacten tussen groepen die niets met elkaar te maken hadden of met elkaar te maken wilden hebben. En die heeft hij toch bij elkaar gekregen.
But I was reflecting, now I will soon have finished my study. What then? I knew I would have to do a military service for 2 years. But what after that? Well, that was the question I was faced with. And so this was precisely the kind of things we were discussing all the time. So it made me reflect. And one of the consequences of that is that I started a study in social psychology. I think a very good experience for somebody from Technical University to visit all those other universities and to meet the people there. And one of the persons I met, by the way, was my future wife. This is a curious story that I had, for the first time in my life, I dreamt about her the day I went to a meeting, and I didn't know, but she was at the meeting. And that we didn't have much time to talk, but she was there in my mind. And then I got more and more focused on her, and I took her out for a walk, and I kissed her. And the moment, this was a kind of magic kiss, like the sleeping beauty in the forest, because she was mine. Complete amazement. Yes. Yes. And of course, enormous happiness. It's still there. The chemistry is that you should ask her, because I don't know. It's a miracle to me.
In our marriage too, we were very idealistic. We would be very much together and look after one another's inner life. We would be completely united. Geert kept our letters, and I read them now and I think, did I really write all that? That it would be so near to him? And then I think that's very nice when you're young and full of enthusiasm and in love. And of course it doesn't last. So I wasn't very surprised when the marriage was, well, the normal base. You see, you find, and I'm rather critical, but I must admit, at the end of the day, we're lucky.
So we were lucky that, we had 5 children, but 4 of them survived, and they are still doing well, and they have children themselves. We have 10 grandchildren, and this is something I'm very happy with.
Before you stands a very proud son. I speak on behalf of the family, and I can say that at this moment we are all probably feeling very proud, although we're also conscious of having sometimes pay a price.
I think she was 90% of my success, yeah. But that, of course, is not a mathematical formula. It's a rhetoric formula. When I had finished my engineering study, first of all, I had to go into military service for 2 years, which gave me ample time to reflect on what I wanted to do afterwards. At that time, I was still expecting that I might remain an engineer, but I would go into management. I thought that if I really want to be a manager, I want to know how it feels to be managed. Not as an intern, but as an ordinary worker. Well, I was doing one particular thing. I got a job as a semi-skilled incognito mechanic. Director of the factory where I worked, he was aware of it, but I felt it not always ethical towards my colleagues, because during the 4 months I worked there, I obviously worked in a team, and I created relationships with the members of the team, and some of them became real friends. I had trouble with that. I slept badly, and so it was a period of stress. But these people were my friends, they were my colleagues, and I tried to be a real person and not an actor. I learned a lot at a personal level. If I'm just myself, without my diploma, without my hair even, they are just ordinary people who can be friends. It was a learning experience. It was a painful learning experience, but real learning experiences tend to be painful. I had 3 different jobs as an engineer, not always equally successful, and but then in the 3rd job already, I had this agreement with my employer that after a certain time I would get facilities to do my social science study. So my proposal was to do this research for my doctorate, but it would also be immediately significant for, let's say, the Dutch economy. It was about the psychological side of budget control, and the title of my doctoral thesis expresses this already. It is called The Game of Budget Control, as a challenge to people, this is a game we are going to win. And the winner is everybody. It is the people who are involved in it, who like it, and it is also, of course, the economy that benefits. One of the companies I had collected data in was IBM Netherlands, the typewriter factory in Amsterdam. IBM asked me whether I would be interested in a job with IBM, and they offered me 3 jobs, and 2 jobs in the Netherlands and 1 international job. And there was absolutely no question in my mind. The only job I was interested in was the international job. My employer was IBM Europe, but IBM Europe meant Europe, Africa and Middle East, western part of Asia. And I visited not all of the places, but quite a few. Once, and I think it must have been in 1970, I had just come back from Beirut on Friday, and I was off to Boston on Sunday. And on Saturday, I was shopping in the car with Red Jan, our oldest son, and who at that time, let me say 70, he was 14, and he said, listen, Dad, this traveling, is this going on? And I said, how do you mean? He said, well, you know, we discovered we don't miss you anymore. And that sounded in my ears when I boarded the plane on Sunday for Boston. I had been invited to give a guest lecture at Harvard. There was a professor there. When I had given my lecture, he said, now listen, would you ever be able to take a sabbatical? And I said, yeah, I just finished my 6 years with IBM next year, and then I'm eligible for a sabbatical. He said, well, you know, we are also scouting for talent to teach at IMED in Lausanne. It's now called IMD. So I came back, I think, the next Saturday, and they said, Jan, I have the answer to your question. You said, is this traveling going on? I said, yes, but next time we go together. And I had seen that there were treasures in the data which went way beyond the situation of this one company, because they correlated with data from completely different origins. And that was when I started to do my research part. IBM has never been a good user of my research. Actually, they probably considered my research politically incorrect, because IBM had a very strong equality ethos, which came from the founder, Thomas J. Watson Sr. And this meant that everybody should be equal and should be treated equal. And when I used data of all places of IBM to demonstrate by comparing national samples that people were different and thought different and acted different, this was actually, well, politically incorrect message. My results to me were very meaningful because they helped me to understand things. So I felt it was a treasure. And actually the man who had become my boss at the time said, no, this is too academic, let's give it to a university. And I said, okay, fine, I'll join that university. I had to survive on temporary jobs, and one was of a visiting professor at the business school in Seat in Fontainebleau. I was also happy to have this experience teaching managers, junior managers mostly, in Seat, because I had a public. I could try out my theories. I could discuss it with them. And they were an international group, so it was a good combination. And the other job was at a think tank, really, which had just been founded, and which is the European Institute for Advanced Studies in Management in Brussels, which still exists. And that is where I actually wrote the book. I started working on this in 1973, and the manuscript was finished in 1979. I got a list of publishers from the books I had seen, and I think I wrote 19 letters. I got about 13 of them I wrote back, and the answer tended to be, this is very interesting, but it doesn't fit our collection. Except there was one publisher where, with the same mail, I got 2 letters. And one letter was from a person lower down who wrote the obligatory letter, and the other was from the president herself, who said, I heard that you seem to have a very interesting manuscript. Could I see it? She was very committed to the book, and the book, in fact, became of her most successful publications ever. It was an idealistic thing to work as a factory worker. It was an idealistic thing to try to become a psychologist if you had 10 years, if you worked for 10 years as an engineer. It was certainly an idealistic thing to leave my job in IBM just because they didn't want me to study the things I wanted to study. Hopscotch is a translation of the Dutch hinkelen. It's a child's game where you jump on one leg and then on 2 legs and on 1 leg again. Well, my career through schools, through working as a worker, through working as an engineer, through working as a manager, through working as a scientist, has been actually jumping from one leg to the other, also from one place to another.
I gave this statue to Geert for his doctoral degree. Hofstede's cleverness is the same what Odysseus represents. He wasn't a big fighter. He solved his problems without, he has a sword there, but without using it a lot. That was also what Geert Hofstede liked in the story, because he told me I got this name by Mr. Inglesis from Athens, and he always was rather proud of this name he got. So that's why we always saw him as a man who got his way.
Well, do you have any upcoming plans in the near future?
And the upcoming plans, I would say that my main activity is shifting at present from being a professor to being a grandfather.
That is wonderful. Well, good luck with that. I hope they all turn out just like you. I mean, in terms of...
I don't hope so.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you.